Hey everyone, today I wanted to walk us through the basics of carving hair. And I wanted to demonstrate on this piece because the major shapes are blocked in. And I would say that is probably the first most critical thing when it comes to carving hair in general, is to make sure that your forms are properly set in. And what this means is that you're looking for major shapes, or what I call major groupings. In this case, you can see there's a big kind of section here, a big section here, all separated by big, 15 millimeter number 9 scoops, right? So first, start with big tools, large scoop tools like this one. I really like this 9 millimeter. This will allow you to get these big groupings or masses set into place. You can also use a large clearing tool, like a 1 inch or a 1.5 inch number 3, to go over and smooth those planes and create these kind of nice forms and masses. Once you've done that, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is how you refine them, right? So I use a number of tools. I typically use a range of 9s and veiners from sizes 15 millimeter on down, all the way to 2 millimeters for some hair details, the really fine hair details. So I'm going to zoom up on one section of this hair and show you how I carve hair and show you the method that I use. I use a very simple technique to kind of break down some of the major shapes that you'd see in hair. All right, so I'm going to start, again, I mentioned using the 15 millimeter gouge. I kind of already did a lot of the shaping with that 15 millimeter gouge, but I can come back over with that tool and make some more subtle blended cuts. In other words, getting rid of these like random gouge marks here and trying to kind of create a smooth form. In this case, since her hair is back behind her and there's this tension held together by the scrunchie or whatever women call that thing. I don't know, okay? I'm not a girl. What is that called? The stretchy band? Oh God, I'm not even gonna try. Define, smooth those masses, those forms. First thing I want you to look for, and I call this a V, and you have to just kind of bear with me because these don't always apply. Really depends on your orientation, but yeah, the idea is still there. So the first thing, I call it the Vise method because there's kind of 4 major forms that I'm looking for in variations. The V formation. This is where 2 groupings of hair start to separate, right? So you can see, first V that I see at least in this project is this one here. It's where a grouping of hair kind of gets pulled apart, like so. So this is a big V formation here. See that? So looking for that. Really, hair tends to want to group, and sometimes those groupings separate for whatever reason. Well, hairs group because there are tiny barbules, and these tiny little barbules are like Velcro hooks. They grab onto one another. And it's not just the oil in your hair that holds it all together, but the hair kind of has a tendency by its geometry to cling to itself. So that said, sometimes these groupings break apart. And one of the ways in which we see that is the V. All right, now the I in Vise is really just a very simple kind of idea that there's sometimes a little gap between the openings of like 2 pieces of hair, 2 strips. So what that would look like, and let's just carve that because I'm not seeing a super obvious one, would be, say for instance, within this kind of V shape, we have a little opening, a little mini opening. So these are just kind of like little areas where 2 pieces of hair group together in that V formation, but then come back together on the opposite side, right? I just call this an I because this looks like a lowercase I. It's a line, okay? And in straight hair, you're gonna see this more often than in curly hair. But this kind of just gives us a way of breaking apart or creating depth and layering, because that's ultimately a lot of what the Vise method is for. It's to create the appearance of layers within hair. And depending on how straight or how curly the hair is, or everywhere in between, you'll see more or less of certain shapes. So the V and the I shapes will tend to exist in more straight to wavy hair. The S shape, which we're about to get to, you would generally see, you'd think to yourself, well, probably not at all in straight hair, but you'd be wrong, because S shapes do show up in fairly straight hair. Now, the hair is going to behave a little differently in this scenario because we've got this tension pulling on it. But in general, an S shape is just exactly what it sounds like. It's just an exposed area, either an indent or a raised bit of hair that kind of follows this loose S curve, and it doesn't have to be very tight. In other words, here's an example of an S shape. See how it comes up and then comes forward again. Even though it comes back up, we're still considering this an S shape because we just really like the idea of that acronym, Vise. Okay, but no, in all seriousness, you're gonna see sometimes that S continue on in a waveform, right? Just kind of keeps undulating. But the point is that you wanna see some movement in hair. A huge mistake, a common error that most people make when they're carving hair is they have too many straight consecutive parallel lines. So what we don't wanna see are perfect eye shapes lined up one after another, in some sort of sadistic, militant, communist hair party pattern, right? We wanna see a very kind of varied mix of these forms. So the S shapes, notice in one concentrated area, we're seeing most of the Vise shapes, with exception to the E, right? We talked about V, I, S, but we have an E at the end of Vise, otherwise it'd be this. And the E in Vise is referencing hairs that tend to curl on themselves. So if you think about what a lowercase e is, I guess I'll just draw it on here so you can picture it. But a lowercase e is kind of this line that overlaps itself a bit. Or wait, I just drew a 9. Am I dyslexic? Anyway, you get the idea, right? We have an E. Am I incapable of drawing an E now? Wow, there we go. Okay, that was scary. I just had a brain lapse. The point is that the E shape is indicating a curl, right? A curl is more common in curly hair, so I think I don't have to clarify, but at the same time, sometimes straight hair will have a tendency to curl. For whatever reason, the occasional hair will have a bit of curl to it. It may not be a full E, it might be a C, which I guess if you want to substitute the S for a C, it's still the Vise method. Ooh, I like that. So it's either Vise with an S or Vise with a C, depending on the hair. But here's an example of kind of the way that the hair kind of curves. A little curvation here. I like that word, curvation. There's my dyslexic E. You're not going to quite see an E shape on a straight hair, especially with tension pulled from this bun. That's kind of the idea though, all right? So you can already see just a few cuts is already starting to create a lot of movement and flow in this hair and layering. Obviously there's still a lot more to go, but finding these shapes is really helpful, and looking in your reference photos for these shapes can sometimes help you to kind of decipher the very complicated thing that is hair. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but for years I looked at hair as this black box that I could never solve, and I felt as though it was just inescapable that I was going to make parallel lines for the rest of my life, one after another. They call it, what do they, I've heard some carvers call it stacks of hay. Stacks of hay hair, where it's just sort of layered, they're all bundled together, and it looks god-awful, right? It doesn't look good. So anyway, that said, hopefully this was helpful in helping you to sort of break down the major forms of hair. There's a lot to it. I mean, this is just a really simple way of looking at the forms. Maybe we should just take a few moments to take a reference photo apart and kind of point out some of the Vise shapes so that we can analyze the photos a little more clearly. All right, let's do that, and then we'll leave you guys. Okay, granted this isn't the highest resolution photo, and you're asking yourself probably, Alec, why don't you have the actual JPEG on the video overlaid so we have a higher resolution image? Well, because we don't aspire to fancy camera tricks here in the shop. We do things the old-fashioned way. We point a camera at an iPad. The point is, you can see a little bit of a low resolution photo, but a lot of information here regarding Vise. So first of all, I'm kind of going to the back of the line here, but Vise, the S in Vise, you can see right here, very soft S form, right? Or a wave, if you will, right? So notice this is not a straight line. So a beginner carver might define this as a straight line from the root to the base of the tips of the hair around the neck, right? They might just define this as a straight line, but it isn't. When you know about Vise, this magical thing that I've now taught you about, you can see here that there's a flow. Okay, so remember that. S form, even in straight hair, right? Definitely this guy has straight hair, and yet he still has those S shapes. V shapes, plenty of V shapes here. In fact, let me grab my Apple Pencil so that we can do a little drawing right over this. Should be able to just screenshot this photo. Again, with the power, with the magic, no. Okay, we finally figured out how to use this program. Oh, get rid of some of the glare here. All right, the V shape, this one. There's one. Very obvious situation where two hair strands come together to meet. We might as well highlight our S shape here, because we are artists. Look at that, artist rendering. Okay, so there's the V. Eye shapes, I mean, really there's tons of eye shapes in my mind, these kind of openings here. Right? Again, kind of a stretch calling it an eye, but we love the acronym. Okay, we've got the V, we've got the I, we've got the S, and as far as E shapes, once again, you might see some down here. It's kind of hard to tell because this photo is not particularly high resolution, but you might see a little curl down below here like so. Again, maybe the vise that you're using for the straight hair has the C in vise. So we got V-I-C-E, right, for those softer curves or less curly hairs. But in the curly hair, you're definitely going to see that E form where things are going to kind of curl in on themselves, like so. See? That's the idea of an E, but it's laying on its back, right? You get the point. Yeah. All right. There it is, folks. That's the method that I've used to break down the shapes of hair. Hope it helps. And all that be what it is. Take your vitamins, guys. Take care of yourselves. God bless you all. See you in the next one.